Okay, this is part two of the campaign, Napoleon's Last Battles, where we pick up at 6 p.m. and the term begins with d'Erlon's Corps linking the two battlefields of Quatre Bras and Ligny together. So it's now one long continuous line from east to west across the field. Quatre Bras remains relatively quiet, while over in the east, the French lust for blood seems to have settled. They really only engaged in a small area north of the town of Ligny. All told, there's some pretty unimaginative moves by the French. They've eliminated the 1st Prussian Corps, and they're quite settled and content, and they don't push too hard in this 5th hour of the battle. Now, despite those unimaginative moves, combat does favour the French near Ligny, and they do force the Prussians back further away from the town and out into the open. The Allies over in the west begin to push their advantage near Quatre Bras by moving around the western flank of the French position. Now, the Prussians also secure the link with the Allied forces near Quatre Bras, and together the Prussians and the Brunswickers, the Grey Counters, stop any potential French outflanking manoeuvre. Southwest of Quatre Bras, the Prussians also move to shore up this space, and they adopt a slightly more secure defensive position in front of d'Erlon's Corps in that gap. Now, once again, instead of falling back, the Prussians move to engage the French around Ligny in the east. The only combat this hour, just north of Ligny, is rather mixed and uneventful. Directly north of Ligny, the Prussians force the elimination of another French brigade when it fails to retreat. And again, that small success, the elimination of a French unit, boosts Prussian morale, but they still have much ground to make up for in terms of balance of losses with the earlier loss of the 1st Corps. So after 5 hours, losses are still relatively light. The loss of the Prussian 1st Corps has really the biggest impact. But aside from that, both sides have been managing their force strengths quite well. These the casualty boxes, and the top boxes show units eligible for reorganisation, while the bottom box shows those units permanently eliminated. To date, no reorganisation has taken place, as all officers have been busily engaged in organising their forces. The numbers below the boxes indicate the number of losses needed to demoralise the Corps. And thus far, only the Prussian 1st Corps is demoralised with all those losses, but there are so few of them left on the map that there's a little consequence. So total French losses are 25 compared to 8 Allied in the middle and 45 Prussian on the right, of which 32 are all from the 1st Corps. Now, in turn 6, 7 p.m, 16th of June, east of Quatre Bras, d'Erlon's Corps moves in to attack one of the northernmost Prussian brigades, and further south, just north of Saint-Amand-les-Ligny, the French rotate their forces around to the west, and then they move to strike at sort of the Prussian angle here, the point of that line, which bends sharply to the north. Prussian forces here are relatively weak, and the French hope to open some gaps. In the meantime, fighting continues in the centre of the lines near Ligny. Quatre Bras, again, remains fairly quiet. The French are mainly concerned here that they don't have superior forces nor a sufficient position to launch an attack, so most of the fighting occurs over in the east and the posturing occurs near Ligny. In their first engagement, d'Erlon's Corps forces the Prussians back in the north, and they advance after combat, once again threatening to poke a hole in the Allied Prussian lines. Further south, the attacks go as planned, and the Prussians are again forced back in many places throughout the line. Nothing too substantial, though. With night approaching now, the Prussians begin to disengage. They continue to rotate their forces west along the line to address d'Erlon's advances, and they take up an opportunity to make a small counterattack north of Ligny. Near Quatre Bras, the Allied forces launch a more focused attack on an exposed French position in the centre of the French lines, just sort of south of Quatre Bras. Now, the Allied attack near Quatre Bras forced an AR, and the Allied brigades pulled back to lick their wounds, but near Ligny the Prussians score a nice stroke of luck, and again they force the elimination of another French brigade. Now, the line is now stretching north towards Quatre Bras. Both sides are finding themselves sort of stretched thin in some of these areas, and of course the French have their guard in reserve should they be needed, but they're really holding them back unless absolutely needed, or they'll have a really big impact, while the Prussians are really eagerly awaiting the arrival of Blücher's Corps, which is quite strong. In turn 7, 8 p.m, in the final turn before nightfall, Napoleon sends his corps into action along the line, hoping to inflict some damage on the Prussians. It's a bit of a waste of time, really. But further south, the French are exhausted, and they only launched 2 light counterattacks near Ligny. Now, Napoleon's assault is actually reasonably successful. It does force the elimination of 1 Prussian brigade, and it sends the other 2 retreating, but it's unlikely he'll be able to take advantage of this with night coming. Down the far southeastern end of the line, a French cavalry attack is successful, and it exposes a nice hole in the Prussian line, but again, it may be too late to do anything with this because you can't do much during the night turns. So with gaps and weaknesses appearing all throughout those lines and night about to fall, the Prussians make the decision to fall back. Where possible, they pull away from the line, putting up a thin cavalry screen to deter the French. And around Quatre Bras, the Allied forces are also quite tired, and they decide to hold their position rather than attempt any futile advance on the French. 2 small skirmishes on that Prussian angle forces ARs, which is actually to the Prussian advantage anyway because they want to disengage and pull back away from the French. And so at the end of that first day, on the 16th of June, 1815, the blessings are mixed. Quatre Bras is a stalemate, with neither side able to strike any decisive or even mildly damaging blow. Ligny certainly leaned towards the French, and the destruction of the Prussian First Corps was really the highlight of the day here. But the Prussians were still able to defend that area and slow down the French, prevent a breakthrough, and remain in contact, quite literally, as the Prussians and Brunswickers were directly adjacent to each other. Remain in contact with that Allied force further northwest. Napoleon's manoeuvre, east-northeast, certainly threatened the Prussian line, but they were able to respond by loosening their command structure a little bit. And as I said, those units filling that gap were mostly out of command. And they sent a few Prussian brigades north, and that effectively protected their flanks and linked those Allied Prussian forces together. At the end of the day, the front line snaked its way across roughly 9 kilometres of terrain from west of Quatre Bras to really northeast of Ligny. So it's a very long front line, a very long battle. And here's another glimpse of casualties at the end of the first day. Of particular note is that despite the losses of the First Corps, the Prussians performed some timely counterattacks late in the day to whittle down the French. And the French have now suffered 41 losses, compared to 8 Allied losses and 51 Prussians. The first night turns, turn 8 and 9, from roughly 9 to 11 p.m. on the 16th of June. Mouton's reinforcements continue to rush northeast along the road. While they can't do anything to fight, they can still threaten that Prussian position, and they hope to threaten the eastern Prussian flank there, or at least cause some concern for the Prussians, cause some panic. Despite his advance, darkness does bring much relief for the Prussians. They move to close the gap between themselves and the Allied position near Quatre Bras. The Allied forces really hold in place there whilst the Prussians withdraw in their east. Now, by shortening that north-south Prussian line between the 2 positions, they free up more brigades, and then once they're in line, the plan is for those Allied armies, the Allies and the Prussians, to withdraw together. The French, however, are really in no mood for a rest, and every time the Prussians withdraw, the French go with them. They push further. And by 11 p.m, the Prussians have fallen back to form a solid east-west line alongside the Allied force, aligned sort of east-west with Quatre Bras, but the French are really only just behind them, and it looks like there may be a fighting withdrawal coming up on the 17th of June.